important point that I tell people all the time. You gotta, they'll give you a lot more reach.
Did just clarify with ChatGPT where I'm based, and it gave me the top 5 what I thought was the highly rated car accident lawyers. And out of that 5, I only know one of them. I wonder what the algorithm is that's trying to figure out based on what that is.
And it's interesting too, and I've seen it, sometimes ChatGPT will actually source it depending on the prompt. Google, both Bard and Gemini, well, I guess those are one and the same now, and the SGE test stuff, they will also source stuff. And so that's what I'm always curious about, because again, my SEO hat is, well, where is the machine pulling the data from? Because that's where I want to be.
Exactly. And just have to know where the game is to be able to play that game. And also, as we're talking about, I realized that we're trying to figure out, but Google has a lot bigger reason to figure it out. They have $1.66 trillion reasons to kind of figure out how they should deal with this. And as long as we're kind of doing what Google wants and doing what Facebook wants, then I'm sure the corporations will be able to figure it out for us.
Right. And I think that's a really, really important point that I tell people all the time. You got to understand the platform's incentive, right? So, and we talk about this with Google Ads all the time, not only in the context of like SGE and stuff, but Google has automated recommendations. They're coming up with automated content creation for ads, like AI-driven content creation. Google has one incentive. They'll say, we want to organize the world's information and supply users with the answers to their questions. Google wants you to click ads. Let's just face it. That's where they make their money. LinkedIn, we talk about the LinkedIn algorithm. LinkedIn wants you to stay on LinkedIn. Facebook wants you to stay on Facebook. They don't want you to leave the platform. And so if you remember that as you're creating content, as you're running ads, remember the incentives of the platform. That should help inform your strategy. I'll give you just a short kind of silly example, but like LinkedIn, if you post native videos on LinkedIn and native images versus like a link to your own site, like we've been doing since social media started, they'll give you a lot more reach than they will if you put a link in. And so, because they want you to stay on platform and, they want engagement. So we see the same thing in search, and AJ Cohn just had a great thing on his post. Is called Google Enough, but short version is that, yeah, guess what? Links in search results that get clicked, that get engaged with at a higher rate than other ones tend to do better, because that's a signal Google's using to think about whether or not the users are happy. And so keeping people on platform, selling ads, those should all be part of like in the back of your head as you're doing stuff online.
How do you stay on top of all the trends and news and updates that's going on with marketing Google?
Man, I don't know if I do. I try. It's hard. And, I'm very much like go to the horse's mouth. So I've got a feed reader set up for all of like the major platform blogs and that kind of stuff. But the biggest thing that I think too, and even I always say, people are always like, why do you say that? But because again, against my own interest, but don't take my word for it. Don't take Google's word for it. Go test and experiment with your own stuff. And people can't express that, how important that is, because what works for someone might not work for you for a variety of reasons. What one expert like me would sit here and, quote unquote expert might say might not work for you for a bunch of different reasons. And so test your own data, constantly be experimenting. But again, keep in the back of your head, what's the platform's incentive? Why are they making these decisions to surface certain content? I think if you do that, you're 80% of the way there.
Do you follow any YouTube channels?
I've been slow on YouTube. I've been much more of I'll tell you recently, it's funny too, because I was kind of slow on TikTok. But the thing about all this stuff online is like, it's very hard to vet. And so I tend to just like, I'll see something come into my feed and I'll go, maybe I'll try and experiment something in like a test case, but I'm not a huge information consumer in that way. I mean, there's a couple authors, like I follow AJ Cohn's a big author. I follow some of the HubSpot stuff. There are a couple of other, like Ross Hudgens at Siege Media is somebody I follow for content. There are some industry folks that I tend to follow, but honestly, I know people aren't going to like to hear this. I know people are not very happy with Elon Musk, but most of my social media usage has really been Twitter. That's probably my most heavy usage. Recently, I've been on LinkedIn because I think it does have the professional intent, and we've had a lot of success, because again, my audience is lawyers, and there's tend to be a lot more lawyers there than on other social platforms. But I would encourage people to use YouTube. Again, I think as we go into this SGE world, it's likely that, I always remind people, Google owns YouTube. YouTube's the second largest search engine to Google. And I think we're going to see a lot more YouTube video content surface in search results. And so I'd be all over YouTube and all over TikTok. And I know there are issues with TikTok too, but it's madness when again, I was slow to adopt. I'll post a video on TikTok, same video, same tagging on Instagram, same on LinkedIn, same on, another platform. TikTok will take off out of nowhere. Now, again, are all those real people? I have no idea. But in terms of views and impressions and reach and comments, TikTok, it's craziness. To be the same thing. So if you run tests on different platforms, I think you'll see, and again, at the end of the day too, the other thing I tell people is people are like, well, like, I don't care about reach. I don't care about follower counts. I really don't care about that stuff. Show me the business metrics behind it. Like what is the value here? Is this actually turning into, whatever your business model is? If you're a lawyer and you're generating fees, are people saying like, hey, I watch you on TikTok? Great. That's a qualitative data point for attribution for TikTok. But if they're not, if it's all like, anyway, this is a whole great conversation too on attribution, because the thing that lawyers forget and marketing people like me have trained them is that, everybody's on last touch direct response. And so they're all like looking at their analytics and like, hey, can I see, click, call, hire, and then, my Google ads has got a return on investment, but people don't necessarily hire you that way, right? It's a referral. If someone saw you on the one thing, then they saw you on another thing, they finally actually, and so all of this quote unquote dark social stuff does make a big difference. And that's another person too, I would say, Refine Labs and Chris Walker, his stuff's really, really good if you're into that kind of like understanding attribution and dark social.
What does the future of SEO look like, especially with ChatGPT and Bard and all these AI chat conversations, MLMs that are coming out? Is it still worthwhile to invest into SEO with that coming in?
The short answer is,
wait a minute, I'm kind of using ChatGPT even more than Google search. So let's just get the SEO out of the way. The question that's been kind of the elephant in the room is, what does the future of SEO look like, especially with ChatGPT and Bard and all these AI chat conversations, MLMs that are coming out? How does SEO play into that? Is it still worthwhile to invest into SEO with that coming in?
Like a lot of these answers, it depends on a lot of things, but I'll tell you where my head is on SEO. As long as people are using search engines, SEO is going to be a thing. Now, how people use search engines and what businesses and law firms can do to appear in search results in order to actually convert organic traffic into fees, that's changing a lot. But say this, you talk about long term, like people tend to say this, SEO it's an investment, right? I mean, if you want to use like the real estate analogy, SEO is building your house, right? It's a lot of the SEO folks too talk about like treating SEO like a product, but your website is your product. And in terms of search. And so things like Google business profiles, reviews, video, all of the stuff you can do organically that search engines, suck up and put in results. I still think there's a tremendous amount of value there. I think the short-term thinking is I'm going to connect my OpenAI API to my WordPress API and just churn out a lot of pages. And frankly, like it will work until it stops working. And when that will happen is hard to say. But, the SEOs were fast to adopt, just churning out, some of these guys did these test cases, 10,000 pages a day and rank, traffic until Google figured it out and then site totally de-indexed. And so there's a risk there if you're going to play that game. But, look, I think Google's not going anywhere. Their organic results aren't going anywhere. I think it's just more of like strategically how you approach the problem may change.
So I found that a lot of times what we have on our phone really dictates how we're spending our time, and that also dictates how our potential clients are spending our time. So I kind of found myself in a situation about 5 or 6 months ago. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm kind of using ChatGPT even more than Google search. So I went ahead and made a big commitment, which was on my bottom right, which is a very good real estate, which is close to like clicking it. I used to have a Google there, and now that's replaced with ChatGPT. But what that means is now I'm going into ChatGPT to search for regular questions that I have on a day-to-day basis than versus going to Google. So how does that play out for lawyers? We're building all this content on Google, but now if all of a sudden there's this OpenAI company comes and takes over people's searches, how does that play into the picture and what does that mean for us?
That's the war that's going on right now. Will ChatGPT persuade enough consumers to turn to ChatGPT for results? And of course, Google is fighting back and they're coming up with their own conversational search. And, we mentioned this before. So one way to think about it is this. If there are enough ChatGPT users to justify your time there, it might make sense for you to start thinking about it. But remember how ChatGPT is pulling results. They're crawling the web too, and so a lot of that's the same stuff, the same behind the scenes stuff that's being used as the corpus for serving results. Even though they're doing it in a totally different way, it's still going to be the information from the web. And so where does the information from the web come from? It comes from publishing on different sites and publishing on your website and third-party sites. And so one of the things that we've been telling folks to check is ask GPT, ask Bard, ask Gemini, ask all of these LLMs where the sources they're pulling the information from. And what we're seeing is a lot of it's like the resurgence of like the directories. And so again, if you want to say you want to be the lawyer that's, I was just doing this the other day, car accident lawyers near me, but do it in ChatGPT, or best car accident lawyers, best whatever lawyers, same thing you'd think of in search, type that into ChatGPT and see what ChatGPT gives you as the source data. And a lot of it's the traditional, directories and other data sources. But I think being there is valid. But it's still a Google world, and Google's got a lot of resources. They've been doing AI a lot longer than OpenAI has. We can talk too philosophically about like why does it seem like Google results or their SE and their AI isn't as good. I don't think it's because they can't do it. I think it's a lot more because they've been a little bit slower to release, and they have a big problem to solve. ChatGPT, OpenAI, they're a subscription model if you want the advanced version. So they're getting $20 a month from people that are using it. Google's an ad platform, and so them trying to figure out how are they going to incorporate ads without disrupting the golden goose and still show these SGE results, I think that's the challenge for them. So I don't know. I've been long on like, look, know about what's going on with ChatGPT, follow it, see where those sources are. People are going to use it. They are using it. It's long run. It's right now, Google's got a big moat around it. So I wouldn't abandon Google quite yet.
So as you suggested, I just went into ChatGPT and I searched for best car accident lawyer near me. And he said, if you're looking for a top rated car accident lawyer in San Antonio, Texas, which it's not where I'm based in. And he gave me 5 names and their phone numbers. And I'm like, why do you think I was based in San Antonio? And it's like, based on the search results that appeared, most of them were appearing in San Antonio. So basically what this shows is ChatGPT is not really ready for potential clients to come in and ask for local services or lawyers to hire from. But as you said, Google does though. And Google, being the behemoth as it is, do you know what percentage of their business comes from their ad business?
Like 90 some percent. You take out the moonshot stuff. They're the one trick pony. I think they wish that they weren't, but that's why if you follow any of this antitrust hearing stuff, which by the way has been fascinating to watch, because they've been very church and state in the past about like ads and organic results and those teams not talking to each other, and comes to find out that there's something else going on there. I'll let folks do the research on their own. I don't want to cast aspersions, but I think the other thing too, we were talking about this earlier today, it came up on a Clio webinar, and I think it's really interesting. There is a huge lack of trust by consumers of AI in general, like as a thing. And so I think some of it's because of the hallucination stuff and these stories, and in the legal space you see these stories of lawyers who are like using ChatGPT for case research and it's coming up with fake cases and stuff. But there's a huge skepticism and cynicism. Now, ironically, Google's been using AI to serve results for some time. But from to your point about like, is there going to be a major consumer shift to ChatGPT? I don't know. Most of the survey data, trends report data, they ask the clients that they surveyed, do you trust AI? And it was 50% said, I don't trust AI. And then if you look at GeekWire there was a big study that came out. I can't remember, I'm blanking on the company that did the study, but if you search for a GeekWire, it wasn't Clio. This was outside of legal. This was just like a general consumer study. But anyway, the TLDR here is that trust in AI is very low. And I think for good reason. You just showed an example. Like, it's not even close. Like, it's not even showing you local results. There are a ton of applications for AI. So I'm not put your head in the sand and AI is not this transformative technology. It is, but it's not in the way I think a lot of people think, because right off the bat, everybody's questions we get every day are, how do I scale content production with AI? And I'm like, you copy and paste it into WordPress, your social posts or whatever. It's going to be riddled with errors. A lot of times we're going to be able to tell. And once you do that, this is my thing, goes back to the same thing with the consumer trust. Once you break the trust, once it looks like you're, inauthentic, whether it's on social media or your site or whatever it is, people aren't going to engage with you. They're not going to want to hire you. It just looks fake. You know, it's like the spam blogs of yesteryear, and no one wants to hire a lawyer that's inauthentic like that, at least in my opinion. I shouldn't say that. There are some people that still probably hire a lawyer because they're not even doing the vetting. But for the most part, you want to talk about long-term, you want to talk about brand building, you want to talk about authentic, like building your moat around your reputation. Like authenticity is king.
Because if you only have $10,000 to spend on marketing and you need to generate 10 clients in the next 30 days, so obviously it's practice specific. Let's just do immigration. Which marketing channel would you invest in, and what would be your strategy?
This is the other thing that I always try to contextualize is like, is this your last 10 grand? Because I would almost, in some circumstances, I would be like, forget about digital, go take some other immigration lawyers out to dinner and like start to get some referral stuff, because in 30 days, it's gonna be pretty tough. If you're in an environment where you can profitably acquire a client through Google Ads, again, a lot of ifs there and a lot of it depends, but the thing that Google has that nobody else has is search intent. And so if you're on queries and they're not costing you more than it's worth to pay for the click, and you can convert them within a target cost per acquisition, search is the shortest. It's the shortest distance, because everything else, brand, it's going to take long. Organic content could take long. So anyway, lots of depends in there. I will say this: I still think if you're not in a competitive area, you're in immigration, and you can find some kind of message and offering that's resonating, search has intent. Everything else is still interruption based.
If I had to answer this question, Guy, my answer would be different. And
yeah, please.
I'm 99% certain I could do it for at least 80% of the practice types with Facebook and Instagram ads.
And would they be direct response? You're saying 30 days you'll be signed up?
Correct. Yeah, direct response. And also, in order for that to happen, you need to have a really good conversion intake team who is a killer at signing up clients. But if you have that, then pretty much almost guarantee it. Any practice type with that budget within the next 30 days, completely possible. In a very systematic approach, especially once I've done it so many times, I already know.
That's another thing. That's another thing I think people should know. People like you that have the data on running it so many times, that's a huge competitive advantage, right? Because you've already done the learning. We see a lot of lawyers will say things like, well, I'm going to run my own stuff. And I'm like, it's an uphill battle, because you're starting with no learning at all, where other folks have been doing this a long time. They've already waded through all the things that don't work. So it's awesome. I think it's a great example.
And that's a great point. A lot of lawyers, you're like, this channel didn't work for me. And it's like, who did it for you? Oh, I did it. And it's almost like a bit of certainty. But for the most part, 80-90% of it, if you're just going in and you're competing with these guys who dedicate their entire life to understanding how Google Ads work, creating different ad groups and high quality scores and optimized landing pages and everything on the back end, it's a very tough game to beat. And the interesting part is, at least not on Google side, at least on Facebook side, Facebook kind of gives you a leg up early on. It's the opposite of Google in a little bit, right? Google, you kind of have to get those quality scores and build up that I guess trust with Google for Google to start increasing your impression share and showing you to more and more people. Facebook, it feels like it's the opposite way. They'll show your ads to the best people who are looking to convert. Your numbers are going to look amazing, but once you scale either past a certain geographic location or past a certain budget, then you kind of go into the real world. And that's where a lot of people kind of struggle beyond the 30 days, kind of scaling beyond the 30 days. So I guess the short answer is it's going to be either Google or Facebook. And you just have to know what you're doing and don't try to figure out yourself.
Definitely ads. Definitely ads of some kind.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing too. Everybody, it's like you were saying, like everybody's like, Google ads doesn't work. And I tried social ads and they don't work. And it's like, do you think that all these people are just continuing to spend money if it's not working? And so anyway, I think it's a really, really important point to realize. But because right now I feel like we're in this world of like, and again, no offense to anybody everybody does it their own way, but there's a lot of like brand and coaching, and it takes time to build brand. Brand doesn't happen overnight. At least, again, you tell me I'm wrong, but for someone to be like looking for you to circumvent the whole system, like your name is in their head, that takes some time in most instances. And so
somebody added to that question about this $10,000 to spend. It's like, I would ask about those firms that are scaling and have a higher budget. So how would this answer change if somebody is already at 30 clients a month and is looking to scale to like 60 clients a month? Obviously with a lot of nuances, but what are those things that you're kind of looking for?
Yeah, I'm always trying to test into new channels. And the other thing too that I think is important for people to realize is that the incremental cost of acquiring a client as you scale, it tends to get incrementally more expensive as you scale. This is why when you see like the Morgan and Morgans of the world, they're spending, they want to be everywhere all the time because they're purely like, they don't even want you to go to Facebook to look for them. They're like, oh yeah, when I'm in a car accident, I'm thinking Morgan and Morgan. And so that incremental growth. Now, again, you're talking about like they claim they're the biggest law firm in the country. So when you're talking about that kind of size, to continue to feed the machine, like the incremental cost to acquire clients tends to go up. But when you're kind of in that middle area, it's testing new things. But the big thing for me too is that we've seen so much value in how these channels work together. Because again, while some people do click, call, hire, or click, fill out a form, hire, a lot of people don't. They're shopping. And so that multi-channel where it's like you show them an ad, they click, you retarget them, they see you again on their local newspaper, they see you again in their email, they see you again on another platform. That stuff works really, really well. And so I think as you start to grow, like that's the thing to figure out is like this integrated approach.
What marketing channel would you invest the most money on right now?
Again, speaking for myself, and I'm counting time as money, I'm in on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn took a while to catch on, but the thing that LinkedIn has is, especially if you're like, I'm a B2B person because we sell to lawyers. So if you're a lawyer and you're a B2B lawyer, so you work with companies are your clients or general counsels your clients or other lawyers are your clients or whatever. LinkedIn has the business intent. People are there to professionally network. Now, again, you can get reach, TikTok for reach, but in terms of like actual engagement with business intent that people expect to get business content and have conversations like that, it's tough to beat LinkedIn in my experience. Reddit's great. And I will tell you, because of this, that article I mentioned before, Google is surfacing forum and discussion content at a really, really high rate right now. And so Reddit and Quora, and I would say vertical specific publishing sites. So like those forum sites are really enjoying a lot of search visibility. So I think that those are fantastic places to be, and trying to understand which subreddits and which threads are appearing. It's kind of the same thing we talked about in the old days is go look for your target query universe. Like if you frequently asked questions that people that are looking for you might ask, see what sites are surfacing and go spend some time there. And this is the problem, right? And in fact, someone was just saying this to me the other day because I was posting this on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, great, just one more thing for me to post on. And so, I say all these things based on like, hey, there's visibility here and all this good stuff, but resource deployment and trying to prioritize your resources, that's why it's like you got to take inventory of like how much time and money you're going to spend on this stuff first, and that should inform where you go. Because if you've got limited time and limited money, I'd rather concentrate than try to like be everywhere all the time. Like it's a different style of growth and marketing and different phase depending on where you are in your kind of growth journey, I guess.
Is it okay for a law firm to have a digital marketing presence, or is there any need for any traditional? And if so, if you had $30,000 to spend, which traditional marketing channel would you invest in? Billboard, radio, and newsletters?
Yeah, that's the thing I always say to people is like something works for everybody and nothing works for everybody. I know lawyers that are they're old school. It's literally like they have no web presence. They're getting referrals. They got these relationships. I think you're making it harder for yourself not having a digital presence. I know firms that are just focused totally on radio. I know firms that are around me, like there's billboards everywhere. So like you can do it. There's a lot of different paths to success. To me, it's about resource deployment. It's about understanding like where you are today and like where you're trying to get to over a certain time period. That's how you should inform your buying strategy or like where you're spending your resource deployment. And so like, again, I've seen it work a million different ways and I've seen it fail a million different ways. I think the biggest consistent thing on the failure, like Pokemon Go is a great example. Like I tried something once and it didn't work, and so I'm gonna stop doing it. But it's like everybody's looking for these like short-term shiny bullet things, and like even if you find a trick, it's only gonna work until everybody else figures out the same thing. Like this is not like you're not the only one who's got the keys to how this stuff works. And so I don't know, I'm just much more like figure it out, put some business metrics in place to hold it accountable, and then measure how it's working. But don't be myopic. Ask people how they heard about you. Put qualitative, how'd you hear about us in forums and stuff like that. But I mean, the intake process makes the biggest difference in my opinion. You can try a bunch of different things, but if you don't have intake lockdown, you're going to miss data, you're going to miss calls, you're not going to know how to sell. We see this all the time where it's like, hey, you got 1,000 leads here. What happened with them? I got 1,000 leads. How is that? Well, you didn't answer 50% of your calls, or you answered it with a press 1 for this and press 2 for this. And like, guess what? Like, people don't have time. They're not, if you don't know how to actually like move them from click all the way to client, like there's a lot of different steps there that you got to make sure. And I'd focus a lot more on, you know, doing it in reverse order. Great client experience, fast response, work them through intake, and then you can go and start trying to add more fuel to the fire.
Nice. Somebody says, I can't afford marketing. What do you tell them, Guy?
Maybe can you afford not to do marketing? I mean, that's the other thing too. I always talk about when people ask that question is like, are you talking about money? Because if usually, and I shouldn't even say this, not usually, but a lot of times people are like, I don't have a marketing budget. Okay. Do you have time? Because those are the resources you've got. You're either going to spend money on it or you're going to spend time on it. If you don't do either of those things, and again, there are firms I know that do this, the stage where they're at, they're like, I'm just going to do great work for clients, and I'm going to hope that those clients refer people to me in the future. And there are firms that do that, and they have successful firms on that. My personal view, you're making it a lot harder on yourself than if you carved out, whether it's time and or money, to actually invest in growth. And then there are firms that are like, I don't want to grow, but I keep thinking this to myself, and this is more like a business thing. I know there are plenty of lawyers that are gonna be like, that's not how it works in legal. And I'm like, all right, whatever. But businesses that don't invest in their growth eventually shrink and are likely to be dead over a long enough time period. There's too many businesses, even ones that deliver great services and products. If you're not investing in your growth in some way, you're gonna shrink. I mean, that's what happens.
One of my kind of responses, like what got you here, is exactly that. So if you're expecting different results, then you're just kind of like leading yourself down the same route. So even if that requires for you to go take out a $10,000 business loan to start investing it, then that might be the way to go. I'd rather do that than just sit on my hands and just pray for the best, because unless if you're going to go grind it out with time, the other resource, which a lot of people are not willing to do. Unfortunately, if you're not the type to invest money, you're also not the type to invest time. So it's one of those, what do you want? Then you can't really expect miracles. Guy, what's the biggest mistake in taking?
One is just, I would say, just total lack of intake. I mean, there are still firms that are, I'll talk to firms and I'll be like, well, how are you handling intake? And they'll be like, well, someone will leave me a voice message if they want to get a hold of me. And I'm like, you're buying media and not answering the phone at all. So, and you know, we laugh about that, but I still hear that a lot. Or, you know, it's a solo and they're like, I answer the phone. I answer all the inbound calls. I'm like, well, then you're not answering all the inbound calls. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we put call tracking in. They're like, I answer all the calls. And then we put call tracking in and they're like, oh yeah, wait, I'm answering like 50% of the calls. I'm missing all these calls. And that's the part that no one sees, because no one's telling you you're missing calls. They're just evaporating. They're not coming back and being like, hey, I left you a voice message. They're just going away. And if you're not tracking that, those are the big ones that I see. But gosh, we could spend so much. I mean, the other one too is just like, some people, like when the way that they're answering the phone is so bad, it'll be like law firm, like, that's what you got that's how you're doing intake. And then we've even had it where like you're listening, because some of these you can actually listen to the call recordings. They found the right lawyer, it's in the right practice area, the right geography, and then whether because they outsourced it to a virtual receptionist or they didn't train their intake person, the intake person will be like, we don't do that. And the lawyer's like, what are you talking about? That's exactly what we do. So we see a lot of that too. But gosh, the list of fails on intake is long.
I think you mentioned it. I think it's very obvious for me that the number one biggest mistake in intaking is doing it yourself. By far the most common, by far. And as you said, there's no way for you to know until someone comes and evaluates it for you. And usually the next step after that is there's a blaming game, and the blaming game always goes to the marketing company. Not enough leads, bad leads, all that stuff. It's always the conversions. Like I would say, the name of the game is conversion more than generating. Generating is relatively easy. Again, if you partner with the right people, the right companies, it should be pretty easy to generate leads. This side, on the other hand, we got a lot of stuff to improve on.
And the incremental value on improving the conversion is so much more valuable than the incremental increase in leads. You know, if you take your conversion rate from 5% to 10%, and you do the same thing, 5% to 10% leads, you will see more value for your firm with the 5 or 10% on conversion than you will on the 5 or 10% increase on leads every single time.
Does it make sense to pay a marketing company to do Google LSA?
And I always say this to people, because people, you know, I'm in these groups, I see all these lawyers asking these questions, and it's like, how much should a website cost? And how much should SEO cost? It's all over the map. So like, here's a question for you. You can go figure out how to go set up LSAs on your own. Now, What's the value of your time to go do that? I don't know. You can go run your own Google Ads accounts. You got to go learn how to do it. I don't know what the time, if it's worth it for you to go learn that versus hiring somebody, what the value is for you. And so I'm always reluctant to say like yes or no to those types of questions because I don't know anything about you. I don't know what the value of your time is. I will say this, like LSAs happens to be one of these things. If you sit down for a weekend, you got to get your documents together. I think you probably can handle it yourself a lot of times. But, I say that, and then I got lawyers that email me being like, I can't figure out how to get into my Gmail. And so I'm like, I think that's another thing that people like me do too much. We paint these broad brushes about people, like values in the eye of the beholder. Maybe it is worth it for you to pay for LSAs. I don't know.
I think my nuance is kind of depends on your budget. So if you only have $2,000, well, it's probably better to just put that $2,000, give it to Google. And that's the whole point of Google LSA. And I called it, I could confidently say this, I was literally one of the, if not the first person to call out Google LSA for lawyers. Because I saw it for some kind of like plumbers or some kind of professional service. It was like a year and a half before Google LSA for lawyers came out. So I went on a search to see if there's such a thing for lawyers. There wasn't. There was only one company at the time, one SEO company, forgot the name. Got in contact with them. I'm like, hey, is this available for lawyers? They're like, it's not. I'm like, can you let me know as soon as there is something available? So they let me know early. They were a Google partner. So Google let them into the beta program. They released it to me. I went and made a Facebook Live. It's like, guys, there's this new thing coming out. And you have no idea how crazy this is because that's where Google's heading. And why do I see that's where Google's heading is because Google is trying to bypass marketing companies. Instead of depending on marketing company to come and put up the ads for you, well, Google just wants to eat up the entire piece of the pie and say, just give it to us. We'll take care of it for you. You don't need a landing page. You don't need tracking. All you need is just give us your phone number and tell it where you want the calls to be made. And that's it. I'm like, this is the future. And I believe like 25 lawyers signed up. Those lawyers, I think like 20 of them were super uber successful, made a couple of $1 million off those. And then there was a couple others that trickled in. But I've still been hearing amazing good things. It really depends on the practice type. I've been talking to a bunch of different media buyers who do a lot of Google LSA. I get a lot of data from them because I'm in a very interesting point where I don't do marketing for any lawyers. So, I don't have anything to promote myself. But one is I'm a potential client myself. And two, I'm a great referral source for a lot of these media buyers. So in exchange of that, I will say, you got to give me data. Tell me what practice type is working. What's the cost per lead? If you have data about cost acquisition, give that to me too. Based on that, I see what makes sense. If it makes sense, I pass it off to our members. Hey, if you're estate planning, you do immigration, you do criminal, you need to Google LSA because the person who's doing it says basically he has a 100% success rate. So go do it. So yeah, but again, coming back to the nuance, it depends on the budget. And as you said, you made a great point, Guy. It depends on you as the person. If it's beyond you, by all means, it's better to do it, pay a little bit more than not do it. And the other thing is opportunity cost, kind of like your time. So a lot of these, if you just calculate the opportunity cost, if I get a company who can come and manage it, get it off my hands and maybe go request those refunds for those spam calls or whatever, how much would that be worth? Does that make sense for the management fee? And if so, calculate that way, then great, let's do it. If not, no worries, just try to do it yourself.
That's the whole thing. You got to just look at all this stuff through business metrics, right? It's got to be analyzed through value of clients, target cost per acquisition cost. There's two other points that you alluded to there that I think are so important for people. One is like in LSAs, and this is true for local pack too. If you don't have you don't have a competitive number of reviews in your area, like forget about it. And so the more broad point is you have to understand what your firm looks like in the context of the competitive environment to the consumer. So, people like me will come around and be like, oh, you need local SEO. And it's like, okay, that's great. But if you have no reviews, and the other one that you mentioned too, that's so important is you don't have your intake locked down. Forget about local SEO, forget about LSAs, forget about advertising. You're going to spend time and money driving visibility for your practice that no one's going to call you because all of the competitors you're showing up against have more reviews. They're open 24/7, you're closed. And so anyway, I think that's the thing I always remind people is to look at your business through the eyes of your consumers, because that should dictate, that and your financials should be dictating your strategy. Not like, people like Guy come around and say, hey, you should be doing local SEO. And so everybody do local SEO. And it's like, well, Guy's telling you to do local SEO because he sells local SEO.
That might be one of the biggest misconceptions in marketing, is that word sales funnel. What does it mean? What is it? How does it work? How would you describe a funnel, and how does that play into the whole system of generating clients for you?
I think of it more as like this consumer journey. It's really about trying to understand how people are first looking for, whether it's you're talking about like quote unquote top of funnel. So they're doing research, and it's understanding what their need state are at these various stages of the quote unquote funnel. And so, and you have to have content and ad creative and tactics for each of these stages, and start to understand where the consumer is in that buying journey. But so many people, and in my experience, they're focused on the top of the funnel or they're focused at the bottom of the funnel. But all of that in between, that's the part that they forget about, and nurturing people through that process, like that's the part that seems to be missing most of the time.
You hit on the head, and this is like advanced marketing at this point. Once you get through the middle stuff, a lot of people, when they run ads or do marketing, they're speaking in a different language than where their potential clients are. And I just saw this just a couple of days ago. It was one of my friends who I guess hired a marketing company, and their marketing company was just shooting these bottom of the funnel ads, showing reviews and testimonials. And I sent a screenshot to him like, hey, sorry to break the news to you. These ads are not going to work. Your marketing guy just doesn't get it. And it's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, trying to explain to him the different way to talk to people who don't know you versus when they know you. And then now when they know you, you need to start speaking to them differently. And then now when they're decision stage, you need to speak to them differently. And a lot of people kind of miss these small nuances. And yeah, I'm sure you can attest, maybe 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, even a couple of years ago, this could have worked. And it was kind of like things that were easier back then. With Google, you just have to put up any ads. As long as you put up any ad, then it was good enough. As long as you were there, that was good enough. Then as long as you had some ad groups and ad sets and stuff set up, then you'd be good. But these days, things have got so competitive and saturated that you really need to be nearly almost with your messaging, with your strategy, with your structure, and everything kind of fine-tuned for it to be working. Yes, again, you could get lucky and do well short term, but in order for continue doing well by month 3, 4, 5, 6, you have to continue doing well. Any thoughts about that?
Well, you said another thing that I think is so overlooked, but the messaging and the creative matters so much more than people give it credit for. People tend to think like, well, I've got to, get my targeting settings right, but the creative makes all the difference. And we found this to be true cross-channel. But if you spend more time understanding like the why people should hire you answers, and then work that into your creative. And then of course, the other big piece that we talked about this earlier, but like test it, right? It's like, just because you think this, or maybe you did some basic research, or maybe you did some competitive research, is that ad actually working? Another person that's been on my radar recently, I don't know if you're following him closer or not, but Alex Hormozi, he talks about 20,000. He's like, I wouldn't even go into market without 20,000 ad variations. Now, again, I say that and people are like, oh, we can't do 20,000. Even if you're not, I know some people, they don't like, the gym type of thing, but he does a great job of making the information very accessible. I really like all of his stuff. And the creative and the testing is so important. You're at a huge disadvantage if you got one ad creative and you're never testing it, and then you're going to conclude the stuff doesn't work, and then you're like, I don't understand. And we see that happen all the time.
Do you guys make landing pages? And then what's your system for creating good optimized landing pages?
Yeah, we've used a bunch of different platforms. We've had success with Lightboard. I think they're currently building on Instapage, but they're constantly testing and changing the different platforms. But the thing that for me on landing pages is it goes back to that same thing that people don't like. There are landing page best practices, and there's things you can test that you'll know, like this will work better than this, like most of the time for this particular situation. But the messaging for the firm, like that's the thing that's so important. And so you can do great and not even have best practice landing pages. Like I'll tell you, right, you probably see this all the time too, but there are some big lead gen buyers in legal that are buying Facebook media, and their landing page, you look at it and you're just like, there's no way this is working, and it's working. And so I think that's another point too, is that what you think might be working or not working, let the numbers tell you, let the conversions tell you, get the feedback from the users. Like don't make it like my landing page looks pretty and I spent all this money to make it look like the way I want it to look. Who cares?
If anything, I think when it comes to conversion, it's very counterintuitive. As you said, a lot of times we try to make it the nicest looking, and usually the nicest looking is not necessarily the highest converting. And then there's like a funny line that ugly converts, right? Let's go to how can I rank in Google's search generative experience?
Number one, I think it's important for people to realize like SG is only an experimental phase through the end of the year. I think a lot of us believe that they're going to launch it into the wild starting in 24. And I would start with same thing I would talk about in SEO. Go try to understand what SGE, where they're sourcing their data to serve those results. But from my limited research on this so far, it's a lot of the directory sites. They're using the directory sites. Moz, you can check out, Moz had a big study on this, and they said like, I think it was like 60% or 40%, I might be inverting those, of the time it actually mimics what's in the current local pack. And so some of it's going to be the traditional local pack signals. Some of it's, I think, going to be the underlying structured data that they're pulling from like the directories and stuff. And some of it, I think, too, because again, remember, if you think about what these LLMs are doing, they're just guessing based on the prompt or the query in this case, what they think is the most likely thing to come next. And so brands tend to do pretty well here because there's a lot of people that are actually searching and clicking on brand queries. That's why a lot of these bigger legal brands also tend to do better when they come into a new market, because they already have people are searching on the brand and people are clicking on the brand because they've seen the offline media. But so it's a hard question to answer because again, it depends on kind of where you are, what your practice area is, what's your visibility right now. But I would still continue to focus on get the word out, get the machines knowing about who you are. Are you listed on Wikipedia? Are you listed in these directories? Are you publishing on these sites? And then understand where they're sourcing that data. It's the best I can tell you.
I found that people are like stingy with their posts. Like, should I post this? Should I not? I'm like, who cares? Post. What do you got to lose? And I feel like a lot of people don't, because they're like looking to get at least a certain number of likes or comments and engagement. If they don't, then I guess they get butthurt about it, and then people they don't like it.
All I would say is like, yeah, that's great. You just learned something, right? That whatever you posted, maybe try something different. But yeah, I'm with you. And people ask me like, what platforms do you post on? I'm like, look, again, resource dependent, but in a resource limitless world, post everywhere, right? I mean, what do you have to lose?
It's literally free. You got nothing to lose, nothing to gain. And there's also hidden engagement that there's a lot of people don't talk about. Just because it doesn't get likes and comments doesn't mean it's not watched and consumed and actually gets what it's supposed to do. And it takes
absolutely.
And it's not just like one content and you just create one content and all of a sudden people are going to come message you, hey, can you hire me? It's that consistent attitude over long term that leads to the result that you're seeking for.
Absolutely.
And that's the game we're playing, right, Guy? Just a super long-term game, zero feelings towards anything short-term. But that kind of attitude really brings the results that we know and expect. And even if we don't expect, this is it.
Yeah, no, again, I mean, that's the funny thing I tell people too, because it's like people are like, oh, that's boring. There's no like magic or silver bullets here. And I'm like, it's like, think bigger, think long-term, think about what you're putting out into the world, and the world will give you back if they like what you're putting out.